There's an assumption that if we increase the diversity of recruiters, then we'll increase the diversity of the staff. Today, I'm going to tell you the exact opposite, how the diversity of your recruiters can be bad for promoting diversity. I'm Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey, and this is the Resource Group's podcast, where every week I connect the dots in terms of best practices and practical research to help the people within your workplace reach their potential and drive performance through inclusive practices. I'm on a mission to give you the tools that you need to make a difference where you work. Get your pen and paper ready, because in today's show, I'm going to highlight the triple threat of why having diversity on a recruitment panel can actually reduce the chances of hiring more diverse people. There's a growing body of literature on this topic, and this episode is the first in a two-part series that talks about this. So everything I say is based on a research paper called Can Diversity Beget Diversity? Favoritism Threat and Its Effect on Advocacy for Similar Others. This study was presented at the Academy of Management Conference in Chicago in August 2018. I was there a couple of months back as part of my mission to seek the best resources to help you on your inclusion journey. So let's take a step back. So imagine for a second, you've got someone from an underrepresented group going for a job interview. For example, a trans person or someone with a disability. Now also imagine that you have a committee of people responsible for selecting a person for this role. You with me so far? Okay, now finally, imagine that one of the people on the committee has the same social identity as the candidate. So if you thought of a trans woman as a candidate, then the committee will also contain a trans woman. If you thought of someone with a disability as a candidate, then the committee will also contain someone with a disability. You got it? Okay, I'm going to pick a trans woman for this example, but the idea is that this could apply to any underrepresented group. Okay, keep that in your mind, because now that's established, I'm going to talk about the triple threat. 3 types of threat that explain why the trans woman on the committee may not choose to select the candidate who's also a trans woman, even if they're the right person for the job. So let's get to it. The first type of threat that explains this behavior is collective threat. Collective threat occurs in our example when the trans woman on the panel is concerned that the candidate will confirm a negative stereotype about trans women. Now, this is a problem for the woman on the committee because she thinks that any negative stereotypes from the candidate are going to reflect poorly on her. Think of that as being guilty by association. Therefore, she'll choose not to support the candidate in favor of somebody else. Can you already see how this challenges the generic idea that underrepresented groups in a selection process for a job immediately assumes a fair process? The perception of others is crucial, and the perception of the incumbent employee is also crucial. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the next point. But before we get to the second threat, I want to talk about the importance of sharing. If you hear anything that you find interesting, then please share it with one other person that you think would find it useful. If you're finding this for the first time, make sure you check out the show notes. You can access these wherever you're listening to the podcast. The show notes have got details of all the reports and all the resources that are mentioned in the show. I've put this together for you so that you can go deeper into anything that we discuss here. Now let's get back to talking about the triple threat. The second type of threat is called competitive threat. Competitive threat occurs in our example when the trans woman on the panel is afraid that the candidate will perform better than her in the new job. The conclusion drawn by the woman on the panel is that it's better to eliminate her as potential competition. Now that may sound cold, but this kind of threat is more relevant when both the candidate and the panel member are expected to work in the same team or even in the same department. Now really, we're talking about circumstances where they could be easily compared. And this is almost indicative of a form of tokenism, in the sense that the panel member may think that there's only room for one high-performing trans woman in that team, in that organization. Even if she doesn't think that, she may think that others think that, and therefore she acts accordingly. Now, I know all of this sounds a little bit theoretical, but I'm sure that you've seen or heard examples of this during your own career. And here's something else. There's empirical evidence to show that both collective and competitive threats lower women's preferences for working with other women in the same work group. As a regular listener, you know that we like an evidence-based approach. But what this is saying is that women have been shown to prefer not to work with other women because of the things that I've just discussed with you. The third and final type of threat that I want to talk about today is favoritism threat. Now, favoritism threat occurs in our example when the trans woman on the panel is afraid that her support for the candidate will be seen as a form of unfair positive bias. This means that the woman on the panel doesn't want anyone to think that she's supporting the candidate because the candidate is also a trans woman. Therefore, to avoid this suspicion, it's better to eliminate the candidate than to be seen as not being meritocratic. Each of these examples, collective threat, competitive threat, favoritism threat, they're all indicative of identity work. And what I mean is, because of her identity as a trans woman, the panel member has to manage the way that she performs her role. She couldn't just do her job. She had to reflect on her own identity and how this would be perceived by others before making what others may just consider to be a simple operational decision. This is identity work, and it can be really exhaustive. Now, if you're interested in this topic of identity work, I cover that in a separate show, and I'm going to link to that in the show notes. But regardless of all that, you should know how common this is and how insidious it is as well. It also says something about the organization, doesn't it? It also says something about the team. I'm saying this to introduce you to these topics, but you'll notice that what I haven't done is gone into any detail about why this happens or how this works. Well, the good news is I'm going to be doing that in the next show. I'm going to focus on favoritism threats specifically as an example, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into how this all actually works. If you want to discuss this with your friends and colleagues, I've created a slide deck for you. It summarizes everything that we've discussed today because I want to give you the tools that you need to make a difference where you work. It's free, and you can get this from the Resource Groups community on LinkedIn. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? The triple threat that means having diversity in the job selection process can actually be bad news for promoting diversity are 1. Collective threat, which points towards the panel member wanting to avoid negative stereotypes from the candidate. 2. Competitive threat, which points towards the panel member considering the candidate to be a potential competitor. And 3. Favoritism threat, which points towards the panel member not wanting to be seen to be showing favoritism towards the candidate. So what do you think? Have you seen any of these triple threats in real life? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.